Hi everyone, welcome to our RegTech Edge No Borders event on conduct, culture and ethics solutions. My name is Alison Shapira and I head up engagement at the RegTech Association. In the spirit of reconciliation, the RegTech Association acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders past and present and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Thank you for taking the time to join us at our first Edge for 2023. Since 2020, we've had over 16,000 people from more than 85 countries attend our programs. For this particular event, we have had 205 registrations from 20 countries. That includes 41 financial institutions, 6 investors, 53 RegTechs and 7 government regulator organisations. So I wish to thank you for making the time to join us today, wherever you are joining us from. I just want to mention some housekeeping before we get going. Today will be recorded and every registered delegate will receive the link tomorrow. Cameras and mics off unless you're presenting, please. Thank you. All questions in the chat function, and don't be shy, please. I'll ask our presenters to jump directly onto the chat to answer the questions that you may have for them after their presentation. There will also be some polls and some questions that you'll see come up on your screen at some stages. I'd encourage you to get involved, comment, and enable the presenters to be on their game. To our presenters, I'd like to respectfully remind you not to go over your 5 minutes so that everyone gets an equal opportunity. And don't forget to put any of your case studies or any other relevant materials in the chat after your presentation that our attendees may find useful. Now it is my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Tammy Brien from Deloitte, who will provide us with a quick overview on the current landscape. Tammy is a director in Deloitte's risk advisory practice with over 15 years experience in stakeholder governance, risk and strategy, working collaboratively with boards, executives and teams from public and private commercial entities. Tammy is a specialist in integrated systems, thinking and helping businesses make responsible commercial decisions. Tammy also uses design thinking and co-design to give agency to impacted parties upheld by stakeholder-centric governance systems. She works with organisations to implement and transform their operations, harnessing culture and behaviour to embed lasting change. She has worked across many sectors nationally and internationally and holds an MBA specialising in social impact. Over to you, Tammy. Thank you.
Thank you for the very warm welcome, Alison. Hello to everyone. I am coming to you from Perth, WA, so from the Whadjuk Noongar Nations. So extending my respect and recognition to those custodians of the land as well. I am here to talk to you about trust and conduct. So from a slightly different perspective than some of our other presenters today, I don't come from a technology background. I obviously come from a people background. So I wanted to bring the human element to this and connect in some of those less tangible, fluffier pieces to what we always get challenged on when it comes to conduct and ethics. I'll take us to the next slide if we can, Hong. So when we start off thinking about trust, it's human and it's multidimensional. So it's actually a tangible exchange of value between people and organisations. So there's no value in isolation, and it actually only represents value in that interaction and in relationship with others. It's also accretive, so you can actually build your, dare I say, trust equity over time in the same way that you can actually draw down on that in times of crisis if you have invested wisely. If, however, you keep drawing down on that balance and you turn it into a bit of a net loss, you have nothing to take on when something goes wrong. So trust is something that is very important to invest in when times are good, because in all likelihood you will need to draw on it later. It's also something to think about that it doesn't flow in a linear fashion. So it's not something that builds over time and then gets taken down in the same way. It doesn't really adhere to normal velocity. It can be lost very, very quickly, even if you had a significant bank of it. So something you have to think about. It also has very real, tangible results in terms of what it delivers for organisations. So economic growth, shareholder value, increased innovation, greater community stability, and better health outcomes. So really powerful in the types of outcomes you can generate with it. Looking to the slide in front of us here, we think about trust in terms of 4 human dimensions. So the financial, the emotional, the physical, and the digital. So when you're thinking about how you engage with individuals to harness and build their trust, these are 4 dimensions we tend to think about. Something interesting to think about when you do think about engaging with individuals, it's closely linked to personal bias. So when an individual is faced with an action that doesn't align with their perception of what that entity is believed to uphold or do, there's actually a choice that happens. So we decide whether we reinforce our worldview of that entity in line with our expectations, or we actually change it. So sometimes we choose to let go of that trust in favor of preserving our own kind of worldview. And that's something that we can't necessarily do a lot to change as entities, but it's something to be mindful of, particularly if that sense of perception is very closely held to that person's identity. And that works both in positive and negative circumstances. Over on the right-hand side of this slide, some key statistics out of the Global Trust Survey that Endelman run. So more so than any other time, business is expected to fill the void when it comes to kind of social issues and doing the right thing. Government used to hold this role, but trust has really declined in the government space. So business is really seen as the one to hold this up. So looking at those numbers there, we're talking about, on average, nearly 70% of the general public, and this is globally, expecting CEOs to be taking the lead on social issues and taking action where governments may not, and to really hold themselves accountable to those actions. So some rather sobering figures there to think about when you're making your decisions, that it's not just about your duty to your shareholders. There's also duties to the public that are very real and can come back in very real ways. I'll go to the next slide and talk about some of those real ways that we can see benefits and outcomes through. So when we have a breach of trust, we see some really important repercussions for organizations. So we see anywhere between a 20 to 56% drop in market cap. Lack of trust generally costs about $2.5 trillion per year for global brands, and that is escalating. We're seeing that trust is becoming more and more important to younger generations. So from a buyer consumer standpoint, ethical and I guess conduct considerations are becoming higher and higher priorities for people choosing brands. And overall, there's generally I guess an impact of about 26 to 74% compared to peers in value. So if you're having a trust event, you're falling behind in very real terms. The reasons why we do invest in trust, however, has many rewards. So we see that, again, customers buying in. So we have high repetition of buying when we see a brand that we trust, and more willingness to try products or services from that brand as a result. So you get that continuity of customer base, and you create advocates in your customers as well. So they go and tell other people. You also see about 2.5 times kind of multiplier on performance alongside your competitors if you've got strong trust. The other piece to think about is the internal well-being side of things. And this is becoming particularly important with the recent shift in wash safety in Australia. So there's a high focus on psychological safety and duty of care that sits with that. So when there's high levels of trust within an organisation, stress is reduced, people have more energy, they've got higher productivity, they're more engaged, and there's a lot less burnout. So generally trusting employees are seeing a happier, a more satisfied work experience, which is all the better for us as leaders. Interesting little side note to all of this is that in a recent survey that was conducted in Australia, there was an interesting contrast between the way that individuals and organisations perceive trust. So as an individual in Australia, we expect that organisations are taking the proactive measure when it comes to trustworthiness and doing the right thing. However, we don't see ourselves as being individually responsible for that. So there's actually a disconnect, certainly in Australian culture, between the very high expectations we have of corporations and what my personal role is within that. So that's also another interesting one to think about when you're trying to instigate change at an individual level within a corporation, that kind of disconnect between the corporation and the individual. I'll go on to the third slide now. So this is a bit of a shift away from just more broadly trust and conduct to think about risk culture. So the way that we kind of enact trust with others is to have a healthy and strong risk culture. And risk culture really is culture, right? And culture is, the way we do things around here, and, what we think is being kind of synonymous with staff behaviour. It is, however, more than just behaviour. It's also the policies and strategies we put in place. It's the reinforcement mechanisms, the incentive structures. It's the behaviour that we allow and the behaviour we condemn. And it's also about how we communicate. So where does the most effort and attention get put on when it comes to reporting or communications or public disclosures? These are all messages that are being sent to our staff and to our stakeholders around us about what matters to us as an organisation and how we actually prioritise that work. I think the other thing to think about is culture is both the current state and the state we aspire to. So we are at the moment, and we also think about where we want to be as an organisation and how we continually reinforce that journey towards our kind of target state. It also talks very closely to how we as an organisation deal with risk. So we go through generally a lot of processes around defining our risk appetite, putting in place really strong risk management, and then providing some form of monitoring and governance to see how we're performing against that. But what we often forget to think about is how many competing demands we might. Sorry, I think it was muted. Can everyone hear me? Yeah?
Yes, we can now.
Okay, great. So when we think about the competing demands that we put on staff, there's a choice that they have to make. So think about if you are regularly telling your team members that customers come first, customer well-being, customer satisfaction, these things that really, really matter. But they're also being asked to provide reporting on cost measures. So how much efficiency are you gaining from your teams and from your products? How do they decide which one of those things wins? And what are the mechanisms by which they make those decisions? Those are some of the issues that we come up against when it comes to conduct and culture and ethics. The other one to think about is how people are going to behave when they're under stress. So culture is great when we're in a good place and everybody's performing as expected. We're under stress as an organisation, as a team, as individuals. That's when we start to see what culture really means for us as an organisation. And it tells you a lot about team dynamics in organisations when, the chips are down, so to speak. That's a good point as well, that what behaviours are ignored in times of kind of plenty, as opposed what behaviours are condemned when things aren't going well. Again, very powerful messages for both stakeholders internally and externally. Over on the right-hand side of this slide is the Deloitte Risk Culture Framework. So this is something we developed to help organisations think about how do they actually build a really strong risk culture. And we try to connect it very much with the organisation's risk appetite and risk strategy. And then we look at those 4 domains around competence, motivation, relationships, and organisation through those 3 tiers of stakeholder groups, if you will, about how an organisation goes about doing this. It's something that has been done both from a compliance perspective and from an internal audit perspective, and also just generally from risk strategy. But we're seeing more and more that the behaviours that we associated with, I guess, acceptable and permissible risk taking, we're getting stronger and stronger knowledge around how to drive the right behaviours and how to measure those over time, and really how to integrate that with your broader cultural strategy, because the 2 things are very closely linked and should work hand in hand. So probably the only other thing that I would, I guess, look to talk about is leave you with the example of incentive structures. So we often talk about, one of the key findings from the Banking Royal Commission a few years back was that we were incentivising people to perform really, really risky activities with no boundaries. And it wasn't anywhere in the culture saying that this was a permissible activity, but it was the incentive structure. So this was a choice that people were making to ignore the cultural norms and the policy structures to focus on the incentives. Think about those types of conflicts or competing demands that you might place on staff when you're going through this process. I'm going to go to the next slide, which is a pretty simplistic one visually, mainly because I wanted to have an impact. This is a good one. 70% of transformations fail due to cultural rejection. So I said it was going to be a little bit kind of provocative when I started this presentation. We see technology as a means to an end in many ways, and a solution in and of itself. It's a fantastic enabler of behavioural change, and a great way to achieve efficiencies in organisations, and consistency. Really, really important. However, it's also something that can't be done in isolation. And I'm sure you've all heard that, the change is the new normal at the moment. How many of you have been part of a change initiative that actually failed to be embedded in BAU? It's a great idea, lots of shiny things, everybody got excited, and then we punted the ball over the fence to the BAU and forgot about it until that team was drowning a few months later. So we need to think about that broader strategy about how we think about the stakeholder needs, what their existing worldviews are, the value proposition for the future state, and how to reinforce those change behaviours over time. And thinking about that adoption curve is really important. So whenever we implement a new change, whether it be technology, process, or other, there's actually a ramp up of effort as we go through kind of adopting that new process and getting used to it before we actually see the gains on the other side. So we need to go through that full journey with people to make sure that it's embedded before we actually hand them over and let them go on with the rest of their lives. The other piece that I wanted to bring up at this point was that portfolio view. So when there's such a plethora of change happening across the organisation, we need to be really mindful about the capacity for our teams to absorb that change, because we're not the only ones doing it to them. There will be several initiatives at any one time, and more often than not, the front line actually bear the brunt of that. So making sure that you have a really clear sense about how many changes are occurring and at what time, so that those impacted parties have a real chance to actually take on that new challenge and that new process and embed it before trying to tackle a new thing. Or that they aren't trying to choose between those two things, and one is losing out as a result. Onto the final slide for me, keep myself to time. So this is a little bit of a framework for thinking about how you put trust at the centre or the heart of transformation. So you need to think about all of these elements of this pie to get a sustainable transformation. That this also thinks about both internal and external lenses. So over on that sort of right hand third of the pie, I was going to say quadrant, third of the pie, this is where we think about what is the visible leadership in this? Who is actually going to be taking the role? Who's challenging the behaviours? Who's setting the expectations, the boundaries? And then what is the design element of that? So this is intentionally setting the culture and the conduct requirements of this transformation and really articulating those so people know what's expected of them. Decision making and disrupting in that is thinking about how you're going to have, sometimes it's a black hat role, so who's there to actually challenge some of our accepted norms and make sure we're being true to ourselves. The other one is actually thinking about how can we do things differently. Sometimes we perpetuate existing norms because it's comfortable and we can't sometimes see them. So what's our ability to do things differently, that if we are going to change something, what else might we consolidate or rationalise while we have the opportunity? Over on the left-hand side of that one, trust and design is really, really critical. So when we think about trust, we think about promises. So what are the promises that you make to your team, to your stakeholders more broadly, to the organisation, to the public? How do you fulfil those promises? What are the actions you take, and how do you actually create value for everyone involved in that process? So designing that into your transformation is really, really important. We talked about stakeholder inclusivity and that impact view. So what is the impact you're going to be making, and can you measure that impact when you're finished? How will you know you were successful? And then that bottom piece of the pie is really thinking about how do you monitor things over time? What's the bias that might be available in some of your tools and technology that you're applying, and how do you test for that? And then testing in that theatre of social license, if you will. So is it going to pass the pub test? Are we actually doing something that's in service of our stakeholders? And how would we know that? So that's a bit of a quick summary. I'm mindful Alison's given me the eye on the side here, so I'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much for your time. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Tammy. That was really insightful. A few things that provide us all food for thought, I think, is businesses are now being expected to fill the trust void left by government. Ethical and conduct behaviour is becoming more and more important for consumers, particularly younger generations, which I'm sure we all agree with. And then that disconnect between what we feel is the corporate responsibility compared to what we believe are our own individual responsibilities when it comes to this space. So thank you. And Tammy, I can see there's a couple of questions for you. So it would be great if you could jump on the chat and answer those, please. Thank you. So now onto our RegTechs. Presenting RegTechs today, Cognitive View, Compliance-Based GRC Solutions, Green to View, My Compliance Office and Wisply, and we are going to start off with Cognitive View. Over to you, Deloitte. I will come back on at the 4-minute, 30-second mark just to give you that 30-second visual warning. Thank you.
Thanks, Alison. My name is Deloitte Mohapatra. I'm the founder of Cognitive View. So we focus on compliance and conduct risk automation. Next slide, please. So every year, companies globally pay billions of dollars in fine because of compliance failure and conduct risk issues. And when we sit down and talk about compliance, it feels like this boring set of obligations that someone wants us to follow, and the breach of which brings this rainfire of fines on a company. But if we look at among some of those fines, there is an 8-year-old grandma who lost her home because an employee of yours wanted to make some extra commission on that day. And that stays in your company's reputation forever and cost you more than the fine itself. And if we look at a lot of the examples from Royal Banking Commission itself, there are instances where someone who is mentally challenged has been sold a life insurance product over a cold call. Bad financial advice been given to customers who are vulnerable and they have lost their life savings. And if you look at the industry claim rejection rate, it has gone significantly high, and the AFCA reporting says the customer complaint has gone up significantly. Next slide, please. So if we look at the regulated industries alone, there are 80 million employees that generate 100 trillion conversation. And each of these conversations can lead to an average $10 million fine, which is huge. The next slide, please. So what we have done at Cognitive View is we have built an end-to-end compliance and conduct risk monitoring platform where we look at each and every conversation that's not only happening at the customer-facing interface, but internal employees. So we provide a lot of the obligations, policies, like ASIC requirements out of the box. So if you are a risk and compliance manager, you can select the policies and controls that you want to monitor. We already integrate with all the omni-channel communication channels that you can think of. And that essentially gives you real-time incident and breach reporting. So now as regulators are stepping up for more real-time reporting, this tool can give you exactly which specific obligations are actually failing, but also we provide a lot of specific conduct risk insight out of the box. And this can be used not only to look into conduct risk, but also to understand your culture and where you need to improve. Next slide, please. So we have deployed to a number of customers across industry, not just financial services, that resulted them in AFSL compliance automation. And typically they'll listen to the phone calls, monitor all these different channels manually. They don't have to do it, which is a huge cost reduction. And we also have specific module around customer complaint prediction and preventing to ombudsman body. That saves a huge amount of complaints and cost. Next slide, please. So we have integrated with all the different channels that you can think of, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, contact centers, and that allows you to actually automate all this omni-channel, not only for customer facing, but internal employees. We also have done integration with a number of GRC platforms. That means you can get real-time control automation out of the box. Next slide, please. So we have been voted as RegTech 100 globally twice, and ESG, where we fit in is S and G part of social and governance part of ESG, which is an important criteria a lot of companies are looking right now. So this tool actually gives you specific metrics to monitor that. Next slide, please. So my team is based mostly in Melbourne. We have some team members in US as well, but the core team and my background coming from a lot of security and financial services background. And so we also have a team of compliance experts that actually have built a lot of these regulatory policies. Next slide, please. So yeah, let's make compliance about people again. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm happy to address any questions that you may have.
Philip, that's very impressive. You went underneath your time. Thank you so much. That's definitely, you get a gold star for today. Thank you. We now have Comply Space. Sebastian, over to you.
Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, attendees and those listening to the recording. My name is Sebastian Lemparski, dialing in from the lands of the Whadjuk Noongar people in the Perth area of Western Australia. Likewise, extending my respect to the traditional custodians of the land and elders past, present and emerging. I'll be covering how Comply Space's assurance platform can prove a useful tool to capture, investigate and ultimately compliantly report on your organisation's dispute resolution requirements. Next slide, please. And I believe one more. Thank you. Yep, that one. I do encourage you to view a recent webinar I facilitated with my colleague Zania. Perhaps while I'm speaking, grab your phones out and use the camera to open the QR code. That'll take you to the webinar, which I can see my colleague has very kindly put into the chat as well. So the webinar basically covers both the compliance requirements for complaints handling interpreted from Corporations Act and ASIC's regulatory guide RG 271, as well as an in-depth demonstration by me showcasing the assurance tool in a live scenario rather than the static screenshots that I'll be sharing today and you've already had a bit of a peek at. But look, this week, Australia's new internal dispute resolution reporting requirements were rolled out across 11 large financial firms that you can see on the left-hand side there. In August, over 10,000 financial firms will join that stage 1 cohort and will also be required to report IDR data to ASIC on that new biannual 6-month basis. I took a peek at today's attendees list and can safely assume all of our Australian friends already know this. Next slide, please. Comply Space Assurance is a powerful tool that integrates compliance, incident, contract and strategy management with basically limitless reporting capacity in addition to useful integrations such as Power BI. One of Assurance's key features is the ability to easily capture and manage incidents, complaints and compliments, of course, breaches, hazards, and any other threats and disruptions via bespoke workflows. In these screenshots, you can catch a glimpse of the myriad of register categories and graphical reports or widgets or snapshots that Assurance can produce. Our clients are actually given 2 sites. So if you can look at the largest screenshot, you'll see a little kind of red ribbon sort of near the Assurance logo there. So that essentially denotes that that's like a testing site. So as a Comply Space client, we give our customers a production and a sandbox or a testing site just so you can test workflows, tweak reports, submit dummy data, and essentially ensure what you end up launching and the visibility you want to give over to your users and the control you want to allocate to your users really kind of fits that size, nature, and complexity of your business. Next slide, please. This is probably my favorite slide, as it essentially depicts the alert a submitter or reporter will be presented with in the event the information they begin to feed into the form meets the conditions of an IDR response being required, so by the red arrow and the subsequent sort of red banner there. This is an example of the system's conditional logic and how Comply Space's template has been aligned to the current compliance obligations, again, released under the Corporations Act and RG 271, released by ASIC. Next slide, please. The key alignment, of course, is ASIC's IDR dictionary, which means that when you're essentially ready to upload that CSV file on that 6-monthly basis to the regulatory portal, every field, regulatory term, and ultimately the data itself is mapped consistently to the regulator or ASIC's expectations. Next slide, please. Not the prettiest spreadsheet, few are, but in this example, you can essentially see the date parameters being selected via the reporting function on the left and the resulting report or spreadsheet being presented ready for upload. In Assurance, you can actually subscribe to reports. So that means you can essentially set up a rolling 6-monthly auto generate report, which will essentially send you a copy of the last 6 months up until the date that you're generating it at without even logging in. I don't like to use the phrases tick box compliance or especially set and forget, but this feature can be considered a pretty great control within your compliance plan, as it does it automatically, of course, but it also saves you time fiddling with report generation and presentation. Next slide, please. So we're working with clients now to embed and, more importantly and more critically, tailor these processes based, again, on that size, nature and complexity scale of your business and your specific reporting requirements, obviously servicing wholesale clients versus retail. If you'd like to know more or have any questions, please get in touch using the email on the screen or that QR code again, which you can use to access our public site, I believe. Thank you all for your time and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Sebastian. That was great. I'd like to welcome to the virtual stage now Gavin from GRC Solutions. Thanks, Gavin.
Hi everyone, my name is Gavin Gilbert from GRC Solutions. Today I'm going to be talking about using adaptive e-learning technology to manage conduct, culture and ethics. Next slide, please. So a little bit about us. GRC Solutions specialises in online compliance training. We're an Australian firm with offices in Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, Perth and Singapore. And our compliance e-learning is used by firms to educate employees on topics such as modern slavery, cybersecurity, workplace behaviours and many others. Also to educate them on company policies and expected conduct, and also accountability and the consequences of unethical behaviour or activities. We operate in 3 main areas. So the first is subscription market-ready e-learning courses. We also build custom courses from the ground up, and we have software platforms, 2 of which are Adaptive by Salt, which is a content creation and compliance reporting tool, and Salt Compliance LMS, which is an e-learning and policy deployment platform. For the next few minutes, I'm just going to be talking about Adaptive by Salt. Next slide, please. So Adaptive by Salt, it's a platform that enables you to create training courses rapidly, deploy them to any SCORM compatible LMS. It offers comprehensive reporting and analytics and very easy maintenance with seamless content updates. Next slide, please. All right, just some features. So adaptive online compliance training saves learners time by presenting materials they don't already know. It provides a tailored training experience so learners can test their knowledge with pre-assessment questions, skipping known or repetitive materials. It improves speed to competence via advanced module allocation and microlearning. This also tends to embed knowledge more effectively and provides a meaningful impact on business culture. Rapid content creation and maintenance, so create courses in seconds, edit them easily, save time and respond quickly to regulatory and policy changes. And deep data analytics allows compliance teams to identify systemic issues and remediate before any breaches occur. Just some other features, it's mobile device compatible, offers text-to-speech functionality. The platform has 23 different languages to choose from, very easy content development, collaboration, and seamless LMS integration via SCORM. Next slide, please. All right, Adaptive also enables you to create, deploy, maintain, and report on campaign-based training or microlearning that's accessible and embeds cultural change in a way that's very easily absorbed by learners. Because our off-the-shelf content is predominantly compliance-focused, many of our clients use the Adaptive platform to create and build custom courses. And this could be anything from behavior and ethics training to product training, policy-based education, campaign-style training, microlearning, the list just goes on. Next, please. Corporate communications are a vital part of setting organisational culture and ensuring people feel part of the team. Now, here it's very important to A, get the message right, and B, ensure that staff have received and understood the message. And here's how Adaptive can help. So the video on the right here, Adaptive can tell you who viewed it, how long they viewed it for, and which questions they answered, if any were associated with that video. Next, please. Inconsistent training across any firm can cause undesirable variations in culture and ethics, and this is where analytics comes into play. So the assessment analysis area that you can all see on the right here is used to identify potential risks or gaps in an organization's training. And here we can observe the volume of responses and completion rates of the learners that opted to read the lesson first versus those that attempted the pre-assessment questions first. And this data can be shown as a total summary of all languages or separately in each language the course was taken in. Next slide, please. All right, so in a recent case study, Adaptive was able to identify a regulatory risk for an insurance firm on their complaints handling process. Now, the way a firm manages complaints handling paints a really good picture of the firm's culture and accepted employee conduct. And from the statistics you can see on the right here, of the 82% of respondents who attempted the pre-assessment first, only 17% got those answers correct. Of the 18% that opted to step through the lesson first, only 24% got the post-assessment questions correct. So needless to say, we worked with this firm on a wider consulting piece to help them improve the situation. Next slide, please. These are some of the businesses who rely on us for compliance training. They're pretty big names in their respective industries. Next slide, please. And I'd like to thank you for your time. So please feel free to get in touch with me at gavin.gilbert@grcsolutions.com.au or just check us out at saltelearning.com.
Thanks, Gavin. That was great. Thank you. I'd like to introduce Evelyn from Green2View. Over to you, Evelyn.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your time. I'd like to speak to you this afternoon a little about what we do at Green2View, but also try and bring in the link between what we do, which is environmental, social governance, sustainability management, and the impacts on conduct, culture, and ethics. Next slide, please, Hong. So if we look traditionally at trust and how companies are actually handling their situation at the moment with regard to compliance and regulatory protocols, we see also the financial markets are driven or have been driving cost of capital investment traditionally. And these are the foundations of most organisations. Litigation and risk is becoming more and more prevalent, particularly in Australia, with regard to things like greenwashing and companies making statements to encourage trust from consumers and investors. Generational change with Gen X is really starting to impact, looking for sustainability purpose, brand impacts. If you have a great sustainability reputation, you are 49% better off financially than a company that doesn't. Next slide, please. So how do we do this? Green2View is an ESG sustainability platform. We track, monitor, analyse and distribute the ESG data for organisations in clean dashboards. It's based on Microsoft. It's completely scalable. It's enterprise, large business and SME applicable. And we have a number of organisations where we're signatories. We're a TCFD, Certified B Corp, Microsoft partner, BFO, and obviously a RegTech member and also winner of the RegTech ESG Excellence Award last year. Next slide, please. So linking in ethics and trust by actually capturing, as we do, environmental, social and governance key performance metrics for an organisation, we're actually able to show the data that can be used by a company in demonstrating trust and their ethics. It really is representative of how the health of an organisation. So things like emissions, utility usage, climate oversight by boards and management, looking at gender diversity, Indigenous engagement, real-time reporting with regard to ethics and anti-corruption, board independence, all key metrics under international as well as domestic standards and protocols, from TCFD through to ASX, through to the sustainability goals. Next slide, please. So in a nutshell, how do we bring it all together? We like to call what we do intelligent sustainability. We can address the regulatory compliance and financial management requirements for organisations through looking at the governance, improving cost of capital and asset value because you are getting actual transparency of data. We're looking at stakeholder engagement. Investors are looking for transparent ESG data over time. We can do this across an organisation and the supply chain. And importantly, the engagement with internal staff, their reputation and credibility. By the data being available to C-level and board, we're actually looking at identifying risks so that action can be taken before disasters occur. And from a sustainability perspective, the purpose, the vision to action, which has been called for not just by Gen Z, but by organisations and by investors globally, we're able to demonstrate how the ESG strategies are being implemented within an organisation and trend analysis as into what they can expect moving forward. Or positively, this impacts on brand. And then you get brand acceptance, competitive advantage, financial outperformance over competitors, sustainability branding, and validity of claims, which are fully auditable. So next slide, please. Thank you for your time this afternoon. Very quick presentation and linking in how what we do in ESG can impact the conduct, culture and ethics of an organisation. And if you'd like any more information, please feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Evelyn. That was great. Introducing Kellyanne from my compliance office. Over to you.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone, or good morning if you're watching from Europe and so forth, or later on the recorded webinar. I'm Kellyanne, the APAC Director for my compliance office. We are the leading solution provider for conduct risk solutions, in particular related to conflicts of interest management. If you could go to the next slide, please. What we're seeing in the market is a lot of reputational risk around conduct, culture, ethics, and employee behaviour, which impacts an organisation greatly if it goes wrong. We're also seeing a lot of organisations, small asset managers, fund managers in Australia and Asia Pacific, look to global expansion to reach other regulatory markets, whether that's investment into their funds from the US or the UK and Europe, which causes them a need to invest in regulatory technology. That regulatory technology, no matter what it is for, needs to help them lower their risk, simplify their business processes, be flexible enough to cater for different organizations' behaviors and processes and procedures, and generally have a lower cost of ownership than building something in-house, or in the case of enforcement as well. If we go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about how MCO can help you. Now, if this was a nice presentation, I would be, these would show up on screen individually, but MCO focuses on conflicts of interest management generally, and so we can turn paper-based processes into automated ones for things like personal trade management, your securities blackout periods if you're a listed company, as well as clearing your deals and transactions, research for conflict clearances for your conflict register. Our solution helps firms manage their registers related to employee licenses, business interests, gifts, entertainment, and close personal relationships. In addition, we've seen an increased focus in Asia Pacific in particular on the recording of inside information. I think off the back of some UK cases with some big name banks. And so our solution helps to automate the creation of an insider list as well. Lastly, MCO has invested significantly over the last few months in our authorizations, registrations, licenses, and regulatory change modules. That regulatory change, obligations, policies, management capability allows us to organize your compliance program as well. So that really completes our suite. And if you go to the next slide, it sort of summarizes those different modules and capability, which could be taken individually or in whole across the platform. MCO is built on a single integrated platform, and so there's a number of central capabilities that are used across any of these modules. That includes your internal and external persons, business entities, security master, and business entity master. The solution is built around a rules-based approach, so you're not having to wait for reports on a regular basis, and has a full case management capability, which can be used for incidents, complaints, and violations as well of your internal policies. If you go to the next slide. Our vision over the last few years has really come together by the addition of these different modules. We really see the importance of understanding your employee risk as well as third-party risk in one whole suite. And so MCO allows you to get that 360-degree view of both and automate and generate conflict checks straight away if there's, some securities trading or a big deal that your employees are also trading in from an insider trading risk perspective. Or if an employee is connected to certain politically exposed persons or senior individuals, which might also have an influence on certain investment banking deals. Our solution brings all of that together. If we go to the next slide, please. Some of our clients are based in Australia, Singapore, Hong Kong, Japan. I would say 90% of our business is US focused. But we cater for firms as small as 8 staff through to our largest customer, which is 100,000 staff globally. And so the solution does have to be flexible to meet different clients' needs across the capital markets and financial services space. Next slide. If you'd like to know more, please feel free. Actually, I think this QR code doesn't currently work. It might have expired. But please feel free to contact me on LinkedIn. I'll put my details in the chat window after this, or visit our website. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kellyanne. Fantastic presentation as usual. And last but certainly not least, we have Charles from Whisply. Over to you.
Thank you, Al, and thank you everyone for attending the session today, and hi to the people listening to the recording. My name is Charles. I'm with Whisply. So today I'm going to be talking about how Whisply is disrupting the traditional ways of reporting misconduct in organization. Next slide, please. So just to share a bit of the story behind Whisply. So Whisply has been created and founded by a whistleblower. So our CEO and co-founder Sylvain actually blew the whistle on a $20.7 million fraud. And through his experience as a whistleblower, and after the event, he was given the hat of compliance and investigation. And going through the organization and the different business units, he quickly realized that people were not willing to come forward and speak up. And he saw that there were some gaps, maybe with methods that were a bit obsolete to report, but also not giving the people the confidence to securely and safely report a matter to the organization. Next slide, please. So at Whisply, we're trying to think beyond the whistleblowing. So yes, we comply with, we help our clients comply with the legislative framework, but we also thinking on how we can foster a culture of trusted conversation, which ultimately will allow to protect the organization and protect the people. So thinking about how you can also leverage your speak up program or whistleblowing program to drive staff engagement, more loyalty, more productivity throughout the business. Next slide, please. So we're really on a mission to connect better. Ultimately, a speak up program or whistleblowing program is a way to communicate. So what we are doing at Whisply is we are making the speak up experience accessible, secure, and simple for the individual. So the technology is no longer a roadblock, but rather an enabler for them to come forward with maybe report an incident to the organization. And beyond the reporting, we also want to allow for the reporter and the organization to engage into a two-way conversation. So beyond that, receiving the report, you also have a way to go back to the reporter to follow up, and for that person to provide more information or evidence about what they reported. And all of that is done through a secure platform. We have all the security certification that you would expect. So the individual feels safe and has the comfort that that way of communication protects them and give them 100% true anonymity throughout the process. Next slide, please. This is just a quick example of some of our clients. We are global. We have office in Australia, Europe, as well as US. Next slide, please. What we're seeing, and it's been mentioned throughout the different conversation, that there's more demand for transparency from the public, members of the public, investors, the board, and that is really shifting the way on how we identify and manage risk within our organization. Next slide, please. So Whisply is really helping foster a culture of trusted conversation where you provide one easy way for people to report different type of incidents back to the business, and the technology is smart enough to triage based on the criteria collected in the reporting form to the appropriate team. So you have quick escalation, quick notification to the right teams so they can actually act upon that report. Next slide, please. So why an effective speak-up program matters? So first, not sure if you're aware, but according to the Association of Certified Fraud Examiner, about 42%, I think it's actually 43% now, of frauds are detected through TIP. So TIP is a very effective way for you to safeguard your business and have visibility on potential risks that are occurring in your business. So as a result of that, if you have a strong speaker program, you are helping reduce brand risk for the executive, the board, and the business. I think at the initial intro conversation, we spoke about expectation and accountability of the executive and board on this type of matters. So, you having strong speaker program helps protect them as well. You also improve employee engagement, retention, and productivity. If people feel safe speaking up and have that safe space to report inappropriate behavior in the workplace, then you are also impacting, how their well-being at work, and that they feel safe, so they will be more engaged and they produce better outcome for the business. And that will also impact potential risk, reduce the cost and risk around staff churn. Next slide, please, to conclude. So we have a set of analytics to give you insights, so you can really have insight to tailor your targeted corrective action and take preventative strategies to address those risks. Next slide, please. Any question, please get in touch. Scan the QR code from your mobile. It will point you to my LinkedIn. So just punch in a quick note that you're from RegTech, and I'd love to connect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charles. And thank you to all our speakers today. We always get great feedback on this program because of the caliber of our RegTechs and the measurable impact they're having, and they demonstrate by solving those real problems for people and planet. And that gives me a great segue, people and planet, into what I want to touch on next, and that is, don't forget to register for Accelerate RegTech 2023. This year we are focusing on 3 key themes: people and planet, regulatory innovation, and accelerating adoption. We have on the 26th of April a 2.5-hour online event. That's free to attend. It's a global event, and it will be starting at 9:30 p.m. Australian time. And then on the 27th of April, we have our face-to-face event taking place in Sydney, Australia. So it's our first time that we've been able to bring Accelerate RegTech back to face-to-face since before COVID. Our next RegTech Edge No Borders will be focusing on financial crime, and that will be happening on the 28th of March. So feel free to register for that. And we also have our first member face-to-face event in Melbourne on the 15th of March at Stone and Chalk, and we hope to see many of our members there. Thank you again for joining us today. We really couldn't do this obviously without the great attendees that we get online, and we look forward to seeing you at our next event. And if anyone wants to stay on for the next few minutes or so, please feel free to put your camera on and your audio, and we can have a chat. Thank you so much. See you next time.